Okay, part B of today's lesson. So, these images from electron microscopes, they take you down to a cellular level. And you can see the components of a living cell. Not the whole organism, but just a living cell. Now, in the case of a virus, it's not a living cell. Viruses are not living because they don't have the ability to replicate themselves without commandeering the genetic material of another living cell. But you can see all these components, and I was using a virus as an example, and that's why I explained it. You can see the components that make up the living cells. Now, you can't see the chemistry, but you can see the material. So, anyway, all of this, the complexity of a living cell, the complexity of the universe itself, the cosmos, and the solar system, and our own Earth, all of these things are an immutable witness of the divine work of creation. In Psalms 19, David gets it. David really gets it. He writes this in verses 1 through 4. Psalms 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. Remember, Paul wrote in Romans that because it's all seen in the created world, they're without excuse. David observed that every single language is overcome as a barrier by the visible evidence of the world that God has created. In other words, they get the message. Even though he might be writing in Hebrew, they don't need to read Hebrew to get this message. All they need to do is look up at the skies, and the message comes through. Now I ask, how can one truly consider all of this and still say there is no Creator God? You just received a basic lesson in how to present the argument for the creation to the unbeliever. You just point to the evidence at hand. Yet there are people who see all this, and this is what Paul was saying, they see it and they do not or will not accept the message. In fact, they will use the very same triggers, that is the triggers for all, to turn around and attack the belief in the Creator God. They choose this false faith system. It is, yes it is, a faith system that they possess. They choose it over the revealed truth, our faith system. Now let's go to Psalms 96, verse 5, and we're going to do Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 11 and 12. These are in your study text. Psalms 96 and 5. For all the gods of the nations are idols, and the Lord made the heaven. And Jeremiah, tell them this, these gods who did not make the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. But God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom and stretched out the heavens by his understanding. Don't know who the psalmist was. You know, I looked at about 8 different commentaries trying to find somebody who would say who the psalmist was. I still don't know. Maybe, I mean, usually they attribute the Psalms of David to David. But the psalm is still truth. It's still found in the Word of God, whether I know who wrote it or not. That's really not important, but I can't tell you who it was. He speaks out against those who invest in false gods they've invented. Both lived in a time, that is, the psalmist and Jeremiah lived in a time and in a place where idolatry was common. Now, idolatry was the antithesis of the Jewish belief system. On the one hand, you had Israel and its Jewish belief system, founded on Abraham's response to God, an unseen God, who called him out of Ur of the Chaldees and sent him to a place that he would explain to Pat. There goes that door again. Maybe we should just leave it open. The door back there. So we can just leave it open, Pat. Just stay put. We have a good environment here. We're all right. So anyway, in the time that these people lived, the psalmist and Jeremiah, the Jewish belief system was the answer to idolatry. They were polar opposites. Those who rejected the existence of God altogether, that is, people who didn't believe that there was a God, were a rarity, because they were either Jewish, who believed in Yahweh, or they were idol worshipers of some kind, and there were probably thousands of different idols across the globe at that time. And idolatry was the most common form of religion. Now, the nature of idolatry was pretty much universal. It was one of supplying an explanation of the things that science had not yet explained for them. They generally saw their gods as tyrannical and powerful. Yet they believed their idols, their gods, could be manipulated. And so they created certain rituals and they defined certain sacrifices that could be used to command and compel their gods to do their will. That's what I mean by manipulated. You know, when we pray, we petition God. We plead with God. And most of the time, it's a plea that really amounts to aligning our desires with His will. And occasionally, we'll make a prayer that asks God to alter His will. And He may or He may not. But the point is that in idolatry, it's kind of like witchcraft. It's all about, you do a certain thing, you say certain words, and the spirit being must obey you. That's how idolatry works. This form of worship, in this ancient form, we don't find it around today. Not generally speaking, we don't. I mean, there's some isolated pockets of forms of idolatry around the world, but not in the form that it was then. I mean, nobody is taking their baby and laying it on an altar and cutting its throat. Now, we do have abortion, which I think is a moral equivalent to that, but it's not done before an altar of a named God, which is what they had then. This kind of idolatry was a substitute. And today, there is no similar substitute in the modern world, except for one thing, which has a parallel. And that is the practice of self-worship. It's a modern equivalent to idolatry. Self-worship is an alternative to God worship. Instead of worshiping God the Creator, we come up with our own explanations for the existence of all things, if you are involved in self-worship. Now, it's a very poor substitute. Just like nihilism, it's empty. It has no value. It's cruel by nature. And it's destructive in its consequences. Self-worship denies the existence of God the Creator. It leads to a kind of atheism. Now, in the world, one of the sources most common today for self-worship is secular humanism. not everybody knows what I mean when I say that. Secular humanism is a formal construct of humanist theory. What makes it a construct is they have published 2 generations of secular humanist manifestos that explain the belief system in detail. Tragically, many mainline denominations' leaderships have signed up, have co-signed the manifesto for secular humanism. And the greatest flaw of secular humanism is this: it takes self and puts it on a pedestal where God belongs. Instead of acknowledging God as the highest living being, they take the creature, the created thing, man, and they put him up on that pedestal as the highest living being. That's what secular humanism does. Darwinian evolution is a necessary component of secular humanism, which is why it dominates in academia today. Even though the details of Darwin's writings have been now dismissed by academia and replaced with various other similar forms, the fact is, the basic concept of Darwin's theories of evolution and the denial of the existence of a creator that goes with it own academia. And it's secular humanism that gives it the organization and the structure that is necessary for the perpetuation of this, I said it before, belief system. A belief system that requires giant leaps of faith. You have to believe that the statistically impossible took place. Literally, statistically impossible. Physicists and mathematicians who wish to be honest with themselves apply their own science and come to the conclusion that there is design in the universe. Now, some of them won't go any further than that. They won't acknowledge that there is a God who created that design. But they do see the evidence for design, because it is statistically impossible for the things that happen and exist in the world to have happened through random processes. Look at all the living creatures that have eyeballs. Think about that. They're so different in all their other forms and attributes, yet they all have eyeballs. How do you explain that? Through natural selection. Statistically impossible. It's not something that can actually happen over gazillions, not just millions, but multiply millions times billions years. It is statistically impossible. And there is no evidence for the existence of life forms over such a long period of time. Those who are invested in this alternative faith system deny the creation as the origin of the cosmos. They deny revelation of the Creator God. They deny the claim that there is one true God. The other does not take a position on the existence of God, but it behaves as though there is no God. So there's 2 kinds in this belief system. There is the one kind of atheist who does not believe there is any God, and there is the other kind of atheist that believes that all these gods are the same God, but they behave as though there is no God. Now, I'm not criticizing these viewpoints, although I very well can. And if you want to do that some other time, we can do it. I'm just explaining them. I'm just reporting them to you. Either way, the idea that there is a creator is not accepted by them. But it's by secular humanists or atheists who are one and the same. I explained how they're one and the same. They either don't believe there is a God, or they believe that one God is as good as the next God, and then they act as though there is no God. Yes, Pat?
I found it interesting. My wife was studying one of Philistines captured the ark, that they didn't try to destroy it. That they put it in their temple. If you look at that time period, the superstitious nature of man, what we're talking about here, it seems that when you're dealing with wealth, you start not needing God anymore, because man feels that he's self-sufficient and he doesn't need that it talked about God's Spirit being over everything. That when we're in need, we have the feeling to reach out to that Spirit for help. But when we have everything and everything is good for us, we don't look to God, we don't pray to God, we don't incorporate Him as part of our life. And like what God was doing with the Philistines was re-emphasizing the fact that He was there, the fact that they had some knowledge of what they had in their possessions, and the way they treated it, God proved to them that He was there. They had to get rid of it to rectify their situation, because God was punishing them. But when we start neglecting God, we talk about a reprobate mind. Like in the times of Noah, it was a whole reprobate nation. God just shut them off to His presence.
Yeah, but let's stick to the subject of creation right now, Pat. I mean, that's all true. I don't doubt any of it. It's a little bit off topic. But in fact, we only have a few minutes left. So let's go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 25 as your printed text. We're not going to be able to read it all. Let's see. Let's start with 3 and 4 and 5. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So, revealed truth tells us that the world as we see it today did not exist originally. Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2. That the primal cosmos, the heaven and earth, was by nature dark. And some believe the earth itself was covered with water. Now we read in verse 3 that God's very first command was, "Let there be light." With this creation of a physical phenomena we know as light, as the command was given, it came into being. Light didn't exist before that. God commanded, and then there was light. What is light? Well, light, as we measure it, as we analyze it in physics, is an energy form. It's energy emitting from objects. And the energy emitting from objects takes the form of photons and phonons, which have the properties of waves and particles. When light exists, it is in motion. Think of it as vibrating. But light is an energy form. The value and the significance of these photons and phonons comes into play later on when we talk about the created things that need light to exist. The value and the significance of these things is, for instance, essential to plants. Plants need light to survive. You take a healthy, thriving plant growing out in the sunlight, put it in a dark basement where there is no light at all, and come back in a couple weeks, and it's changed color. It's withering. It's dying. It's because it needs light. When it takes up minerals and water from its root system and brings it out to its leaves, it needs that light to convert the minerals and the water to amino acids, to carbohydrates, to form tissue. So leaves will begin to grow and branches will begin to grow because light performs some magic. I love saying it that way. You know why I love saying it that way? We can measure the effect, we can analyze the chemistry and see it happen, but we haven't got a clue why it works. We know it works, but we don't know why. But God created photosynthesis, and plants live because of light that God created. Now, the first use of light was to separate day and night, because when the light was first created, the plants didn't exist. But it did separate day and night. We know the cause of this distinction between day and night is not caused by somebody throwing a switch on and off. It's the rotation of planet Earth and its position in front of the sun. We know that. That's the physical cause, but it is God who set it in motion. It is God who caused the sun to burn. It is God who caused the earth to go in an orbit around the sun. And God who makes the earth rotate and spin on its axis. And you know what God said about that after he had created this day and night situation? What did he say here?
He saw that it was good.
Yeah, he said, this is good. Or at least that's the message that he gave to Moses. This night and day thing, it's good. Now, the next thing that God does, he creates some other domains. Do we have time? I'm actually out of time. But the next thing he does is he creates the sphere of water and the sphere of the earth. And he assigns the water a position in two places, the sea and the air. Water occurring in the rivers is going to the sea, but it comes from the air. The vapor that is held in the atmosphere comes down in the form of rain and snow by God's design. And it enters the rivers and flows downhill because God created gravity. And when it goes downhill, it goes to the sea. And eventually, the sun causes it to evaporate, and it goes back to its holding tank, the atmosphere. And all of this was good in God's design. And all of it was calculated to support life. The next thing that God creates, the living creatures of the sea, of the air, and of the ground. And that takes us up through day 6 of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And on day 7, he made man. Day 6. You guys got to keep me straight. On day 6, he made man. On day 7, he rested. So no wonder he needed to rest. He made woman too. Just kidding.
Man.
I'm just kidding. On the 6th, he made man and he made woman. He made man from the dust of the earth. We are to believe the book itself as Moses wrote it. He took dust of the earth and he formed man. And then he breathed in his nostrils and man became a living creature. Woman he made differently. Woman he took a rib from Adam and he took the dust of the earth and he fashioned around that rib a living creature, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. And Adam called her woman. So today, what we've looked at is the Genesis account of the creation of our cosmos, this place where we live. Whether you view it from the position of the earth itself, planet Earth, or you view it from outer space, all of it was created by God.
Amen.
Enjoyed your comments today. God bless you all. Enjoy the worship as you go back to
My
church.
greatest experience was Grand Canyon.
Oh, yeah?
I stood up at the top of all the hills and mountains and looked way down in the valleys. And then we took the tour and went down in the valley and rode on the back of camels and horses and.
You know, one of the neat things about the Grand Canyon is that it proves the flood, because it is literally impossible for that canyon to have been carved
Yep.
by eons of a little river in the bottom flowing through there. It would have had to be much greater than it is. I mean, it took a flood that was global, receding, for that canyon to be created. There's just so much in nature that speaks to the truth and veracity of the scriptures. God bless you all. Enjoy the worship today. Sorry we didn't get through everything, but I think that's pretty much expected, isn't it?
You must, well, being out there, did you also see the Great Plains?
Yes,
That's both situations, you know, you can see photographs of stuff,
yeah,
but unless you're standing there and, you know, amongst the expanse of all these things, you know, it does something to you spiritually.
yeah.